Hey guys, and welcome to the Incident Response Strategies webinar by Granite Insurance. We appreciate you guys being here. I'm Cameron Annis. I lead up our national practice group in the adventure and entertainment world, and I've also got Ruthie with me.
Hey guys, my name is Ruthie Rivers, and I lead our agency's River Outfitter program.
Awesome. We do these webinars to empower you guys to operate your operations more successfully. And what better time to do incident response strategies than at the beginning of your season? And so to kind of give you guys an idea of people that we have on the call, we've got anyone really associated with the adventure or entertainment industries. We had over 150 people sign up for this webinar. So obviously it's a hot topic. But anyone from indoor climbing gyms to haunted houses to campgrounds to zip lines and aerial parks, theme parks, whitewater rafting and river operators, and really many more segments as well, bike rental companies, bike tour companies. So today we're going to be talking in broadly about incident response strategies, and really how do you control these incidents whenever they happen. Couple of housekeeping things that I'll go over to begin with. Number one is the chat function is open and also the Q&A function. So please make sure if you have any questions or answers or questions, make sure to put them in the Q&A. And if you look, I believe it's at the top section of your screen, there's a Q&A button there. So just click that and you can ask any questions and we'll answer those in real time as you guys ask those. Same thing for the chat function. If you guys want to make any comments or emphasis or comments on anything that we're pointing out, go ahead and mention that in the chat function as well. Go ahead and mark your calendars for the next webinar that we'll be doing. That will be on June 5th at 11 a.m. It's a Wednesday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And that will be on a topic around controlling your workers' compensation costs. So there's a lot more to controlling work comp costs other than just having fewer claims. And we'll go into a proven process of how do you make sure to keep your workers' compensation premium as controlled as possible. So look forward to seeing you guys on that webinar June 5th. And that invitation will go out via email. If you received this invitation, you'll also get that invitation. That'll go out via email probably in the next 2 weeks. Last thing I'll say is this webinar is being recorded. So if you registered for this, you will get a recording of this webinar as well. So feel free, share that with your teams, share it with your managers, anybody else that you think could benefit from this, and even maybe put it on your onboarding platform for your management team. Feel free to use this at your disposal anytime you would like to do so. All right, Ruthie, any more housekeeping Q&A things that I missed out on?
I think you covered it all.
Fantastic. I know somebody said, I was looking at the chat here, no audio, but then they said they got it. Awesome. Um, so to kind of set the stage, guys, how many of you, whenever you've had an incident, you kind of feel like you're out on the middle of this pathway, in the middle of nowhere, nobody around you, and you kind of feel like you're hopeless? And to kind of paint the scenario, imagine an incident happens today. Today at your operation, whatever it may be, you have a large incident, or let's say a medium-sized incident. And you're like, I don't think anything's going to come out of this. Fast forward 3 years. In 3 years, a nice little packet shows up on your door that says, hey, you've been sued. And you're being sued. And whenever you look around and try to find documents, you don't have an incident report. You don't have a witness statement. You don't even know who to go collect witness statements from because you have no clue who was at the facility that day. You don't have photos of the equipment that was being used at the time of the incident. You don't have photos of the surrounding area where the incident happened. And you're really you're in a defenseless position whenever you in 3 years from now, whenever you're being asked to respond to this incident, which really puts you in a very vulnerable position whenever somebody's coming at you and saying, hey, you did these things, and you're in a position to where you can't defend yourselves in those positions. And Ruthie's, talk to me a little bit about statute of limitations and kind of timeframes.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have any of those things, just years down the road, you're unable to just recreate your scenario. That leaves you pretty defenseless, and it also leaves your insurance carrier pretty defenseless as well, and leads to the kind of scenario where they just may settle on your behalf and not even try to defend you if they don't have if they don't have the tools there to defend you. So Cameron's mentioning 3 years down the road, and really that's one of the best case scenarios. Some states, the statute of limitations is even something like 6 years. Or if you think you have let's say there's a child involved in the incident, the statute of limitations doesn't even begin for your state until that child turns 18 years old. So really, yeah, you just need to be prepared to be able to fully recreate the scenario, be able to recall all of the details years and years and years down the road. And so that's part of what we're talking about today, is how to best prepare yourself for that kind of situation.
Kind of three, before we go to the next slide, kind of three things that, 3 points that I'll say we'll talk about today, and kind of three really comments to start off with is, number one, people do not typically sue because what happened. All right, just remember that. And you may think that's odd, but just keep that in your mind. Number two, typically large payouts from insurance companies are typically due to the fact that we can't defend the operation because we don't have enough evidence and things to be able to defend you with. And then number three, typically claims happen whenever there is a difference between expectation versus reality. The way I think about this is, for you guys that have, or anybody that has kids, I think of it that way, in that anytime you tell a kid, hey guys, this is probably what we're going to do, or we're going to be able to do this, think about what happens whenever you don't do that thing. They always comment, well, you said XYZ. And there's just a huge difference between expectation versus reality. And the greater that difference is, the more chance that you're going to have a lawsuit coming on your doorstep in a couple of years.
So I like to categorize just our approach here into kind of 4 different stages. So the first stage we're going to be talking about is pre-incident. So what are you doing in terms of your team training, in terms of, what kind of documents you're ready to pull together after an accident has occurred? What are you doing in terms of just getting your team prepared to actually deal with an accident, just kind of getting these parameters in place prior to an accident occurring? This is the time to be doing all of this prep right now before you have this big accident hit. Second stage, immediate response to an accident occurring. In that first hour, or in those first couple of hours of dealing with the accident, what does that look like? How are your team members interacting with the injured participant or with their family? Third stage is, you're not doing this in the heat of the moment when you're more focused on medical care, but pretty soon after that initial incident response, we're shifting focus to working on the accident reports and witness statements and all of that collection. So what does that kind of look like, and how should you go about that? How should you not go about that? Almost even more importantly. And then post-accident, 24 hours later, are you following up with the family or the injured participant? What did those conversations look like? What can you expect kind of, between that accident occurring and then the end of the statute of limitations? What might that kind of look like? So those are the 4 kind of stages that we're going to be focusing on one at a time today and kind of digging deeper into.
Thanks, Ruthie. And before we go to the next slide, I just want to address one of the Q&As that kind of came through. And some of these may not, if we're not going to talk about it today, we'll go ahead and address this as we go throughout the presentation. But it's, to what extent do liability waivers provide protection for the business? Liability waiver, and that's a great question. So liability waivers can be very beneficial. What I would say is the effect of that waiver has to do with a lot of things. Number one, what state or venue that you're located in. Some are stronger venues or states than others. Number two is who wrote the release or the liability waiver. Having an attorney that specializes in the recreation, adventure, or entertainment world is very important, just because they know they have experience in this world, and there's certain things in certain states that have to be included within that release statement. And third, I would say, is knowing the difference between a release statement versus an assumption of risk statement. And those are two different statements, two different legal arguments, and a recreational attorney would be able to guide you on how to incorporate both of those arguments or or legal arguments into your documents for your participants beforehand. Ruthie, anything that you would add on waivers and their effectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, just every once in a while, I will hear from someone that says, oh yeah, we do waivers. All of our participants sign waivers. I'm not too, worried about, so and so after this, these other kind of steps. A waiver is one piece of your risk management program, right? It can't be the only piece. And you can't really have a solid, for most adventure and entertainment businesses, you can't have a solid risk management program without that piece. That's just one piece of the collective program. So, it helps depending on how well written it is and what state you're in, et cetera. But it's a necessary piece of a larger picture.
Great. Thanks, Ruthie. And the analogy we like to use sometimes is this, whenever you're in a legal suit, sometimes it's a game of poker and that you're trying to accumulate the largest stack of chips possible. And that waiver is a huge stack of chips that can help you. But to Ruthie's comment, it's not the whole game. And so take that into consideration. Another Q&A that came in relation to that was, state by state variance of bulletproof a digital signature versus a wet signature on a waiver. We recommend digital waivers purely because the chances of losing them and the ease of finding them is a lot better. Plus, pretty much every state law or every state has passed digital signature recognition. So we really recommend digital waivers. I'll tell you a plug. If you go, there is another webinar that we did in 2023 on top 5 mistakes of a waiver. And it's with Leah Corrigan, who is with Recreation Law Group. If you go to our website, graniteinsurance.com, top right-hand corner, there's a Granite webinar series. All of our webinars are recorded and posted there. And there's the one on top 5 mistakes of waivers. So feel free to check that out as well on waivers, since there was a couple questions there.
All right, so focusing on the pre-incident stage of your risk management plan. So, like we said, before you have an accident occur, right now is the time to put this plan together. And not just to put this plan together and put it in a notebook and store it somewhere in your office, right? But make sure that's your team that actually has feet on the ground at your operation is well versed in it and feels like they know how to navigate it and are ready to kind of pull that out and make it happen in the wake of an accident. So the first question, who is responsible for seeing an accident response through from start to finish on your team? I was an adventure operator before coming into this role, and I know that a lot of you wear many hats in your operation, right? You have people that are doing multiple different aspects of your business. Hopefully you're not having accidents often enough where you have someone designated as, the accident response, person that's dealing with it from start to finish. So that means if there's not somebody who has that designated as their core job, when an accident happens, who is that one? Who is that person that's seeing it through? It could be the manager on duty when that accident occurred. It could be the general manager. It could be the owner in some scenarios, right? But just making sure that there's a clear plan for that and who is responsible for doing what part of your accident response. I think it's really important to have someone designated as a quarterback for this process, because if there's any ambiguity behind who is doing what in your accident response, that leaves gaps, and it makes it easy to have miscommunications and to think somebody else took care of something when they didn't, and to leave part of it not even handled at all. So the process, I think that one of the most common questions I get in just establishing your accident response process is, where do you draw the line between giving somebody a Band-Aid and pulling out a full-on accident report, filling it out with witness statements and offering to call an ambulance and, reporting to insurance and doing all of this kind of stuff, right? So that's one thing to clarify with your team, figuring out what makes sense for you and speaking with your insurance representation on this as well. One of the guidances that we usually like to give is separating it out based on the severity of the accident. So, is this injured individual able to continue the activity? Are they requiring professional medical attention, whether that's, immediate ambulance is coming, or they are having a family member drive them to urgent care or something like that? Are they needing professional medical attention? And then another kind of way I like to look at it is the temperature of the conversation. Even if it is kind of a lower severity accident, are they really heated, or are their family members really heated? That could indicate a potential lawsuit coming down the line. And so getting kind of a sense of either the severity of the accident or the temperature of that, the communication, and maybe kind of drawing a line there, right? Communicating with your insurance representation on all of this and making sure that you're on the same page. But I call kind of those smaller items, those are incidents. And then I kind of deem the larger ones that require the professional medical attention accidents. And you might have two potentially different reports for those things. Maybe it does make sense if you're handing out a Band-Aid or you're handing out a bag of ice or something like that. You're still writing that down, right? You're still documenting it. You might still have just a smaller kind of document where you're putting the date, the person's name, what occurred, just like super basic details, just so you have something to refer back to if you need to recall that in the future. But if you have those higher severity, higher temperature situations, maybe that's when you kind of switch over to, filling out that full, very, very detailed accident report, offering to call an ambulance or the EMT, and, just kind of pulling out all of the stops with that kind of scenario. So just figuring out the process that works for you and making sure that you're on the same page with your insurance representation as well. So what documents do you have? Do you have that kind of potentially smaller incident report? Do you have a bigger accident report? Do you have the waiver? Do you document the training of a participant? If you have kind of a participant, just kind of orientation to your activities or pre-trip talk or anything like that, do you document what the content of that is? And do you document that they went through that training and said that, they were good, they didn't need any further instruction? Same question with staff members. If a staff member was involved in the accident, was their training documented by you? When that training occurred, who facilitated that training? All kinds of questions like that. Just think about, if you were to have an accident, the opposing attorney could just go through so many kind of different rabbit holes, just kind of thinking that through pre-accident and thinking what kind of tools might be helpful to have to defend you if that is brought into a lawsuit down the line. And Cameron, we've got the QR code as well there, but what would you add to that?
The only thing, yeah, on that QR code, a lot of this is it's hard to remember, especially if you're going through this, you're like, oh, it makes sense now. But if your next incident or accident is 6 months from now, it may be difficult to remember everything that Ruthie just said. So that QR code, if you scan that, that'll take you to a 6-step, 1-page document. And what that is it's hosted on our website, easily accessible. But scan that in 6 steps of, hey, this is what you do. And just keep that in your office, keep that somewhere easily accessible. That way, whenever something does happen, we're in an industry, it's not if something happens, it's typically when something happens. You can recall that document and walk through those 6 steps to make sure that you don't miss a step there. I know we had a question that popped up, and I'm going to leave that there because we will actually chat about that in just a minute. All right.
All right, so we are getting into the incident response part of it. So that immediate kind of response, that first hour of an accident, right? But before we get into the how to put your incident response together, I think it's important to just kind of take a step back and learn from what other people have done, right? What we've experienced, other people going through after an accident, and not being sure, like what they can or can't say, what they can or can't do. I think that one of the big things to focus on, is, text. I put email communication on here, but really any kind of written communication, be careful of. We want to suppress a bunch of chatter after the accident, especially discussion on what you or your team members might have done wrong, or what they could have done better, or so and so did this on the team, and I can't believe they did this. We like trained to do it this way differently. We want to keep all of that chatter to a minimum, and cut that out. So we want to make sure our team is on board with that. Email communication, even to your insurance representation. We've received emails before with that kind of thing, right? Like, hey, we had an accident yesterday. We have the accident report here attached to the email. We have the waiver signed here attached to the email. But just to provide you with a little bit more information, this is what happened. I think we could have done this better. We're going to change this in our operations for the future to make sure this doesn't happen again. And while all of that is incredibly valuable for you guys to work through as a team and as an operation, and it's so fantastic that this individual was thinking ahead and thinking about how to better their operation. That's super crucial in what we do, right? But that's not the type of thing to put in an email. We want to have that maybe as a phone call saying like, all right, the email has the accident report and the waiver, but then a phone call saying, hey, let's debrief this a little bit, and discussing kind of like why you might want to do things differently in the future. And if you are choosing to do things differently in the future, if you think that makes sense for your operation, not voicing that to anyone or to your team as a direct result of this accident. You want to disconnect those two things entirely and just say like, hey, we're changing operations moving forward. This is how we're going to be doing this in the future, but don't necessarily say this is a direct result of this accident. Um, I've also seen situations where the the operation is in discussion with an injured participant and their family. And it's going really well. The injured participant is saying, hey, listen, like I made a stupid mistake. I get it. This is my fault. I'm sorry. Like, we're not going to sue you guys. Like, I appreciate what you're doing for me. I made a mistake. This isn't your fault, right? We can get happy ears with that and say, all right, that's done. I don't have to worry about it anymore. But I've seen it play out where, the injured participants, one of their family members kind of comes into the picture. They start receiving a bunch of medical bills and start getting worried about how to pay those medical bills. And, we can't let our guard down just because we're hearing things like, we will never sue you. I think that we need to be prepared for it, regardless of whether we're hearing that or not, because I have seen it turn around and an injured participant's family member kind of convince them, hey, I think you need to bring a lawsuit here. And then it winds up changing and you wind up receiving that lawsuit. So another thing to avoid is just the kind of we'll just pay it ourselves mentality, right? I hear people ask about this all the time, and it's a great question. You're thinking about how to keep your insurance premiums down, or you're thinking if you have an accident occur and you report it to your insurance and your insurance pays it, it's just going to make your rates and your premium go up in the future, right? If you pay it yourself, like let's say you have an accident, you think it's just kind of the medical bill that needs to be paid. You pay 15,000 out of pocket to cover that medical bill and keep it outside of insurance. But then that turns into a lawsuit down the road. You won't get that money back. It's not going to be counted towards a deductible. It's not going to be reimbursed by your insurance company. If you are doing this totally outside of insurance, then you're doing that totally outside of insurance. So we definitely recommend, having that all go through insurance, discussing with your insurance representation, how to best defend yourself, how to best structure that. Maybe, accept a higher deductible on your policy if you feel like you have the financial bandwidth to be able to do that. There are ways to address that in your program without the financial liabilities that this might kind of bring to you down the line. Cameron, what would you add to that?
Great job, Ruthie. And the only thing I would add to that is on the topic of we will just pay for it ourselves. Make sure that insurance is a legal contract. Just make sure that you're aware of what your reporting requirements are in that legal contract. A typical general liability policy says you must notify the carrier of any incident which you believe may lead to a claim. And so the position you do not want to be in is the carrier alleging misrepresentation where you know something could lead to a claim and you did not notify them. So just make sure you have just open communication around that. And to Ruthie's point also on communication, like emails, text, things of that nature, the big reason for the why of that is all of that is discoverable. Once you get involved in a legal suit and they subpoena you, your team members, things of that nature, they can bring out all those emails. They can bring out all those text messages, even text messages between team members. They can bring those out. So how do you prevent that? What we typically recommend is a simple statement in your employee handbook around communication after an incident and essentially just preventing that, not internally, but also to the media. The last thing you want is people talking to the media about these incidents, but having a statement in your employee handbook that all communication around any incident comes from one person. And you need to label who that person is. Is it the general manager? Is it the owner? That way, the whole team knows any incident questions from team members or from the media. They direct them to that person of, hey, you should probably chat with that person. And they know they're not allowed to talk about that. Great. I'm just going to check the Q&A real quick. I know somebody made a comment just on, I thought improvements changes based on new knowledge, new information, such as incidents, could not be held against you or brought up in a case. So that's a great question, and that is state dependent. So yes, there are in some states, which I think is a correct way to approach this. It says if an incident happens, let's say somebody trips over a sidewalk and you go afterwards and paint that sidewalk edge yellow, that cannot be held against you from the prior incident because you're trying to make yourself better. Yes, that is 100% the case in some states, but not all states. It's that way. So just we like to be careful in making sure to separate those and not stating that, hey, because of this incident, we are painting the sidewalk yellow. That can just be a general improvement that we're doing to the site. So making sure that we're not tying those two things together. How is the communication enforceable regarding incidents with employees? So with that question, I think it's, what you're able to do if there's a violation. Obviously, yes, you can terminate that employee after you speak with your HR attorney or your employment attorney. But I would say it's more of just the expectation being set. What we see typically is people talking with team members or people talking with the media, and they're not doing that out of spite. They're just doing that because they don't know that they're not supposed to do that. And so I think the employee handbook really does a great job of setting the stage and setting the tone of, hey guys, we expect you not to do this to prevent that from happening. Kind of that illustration of reality versus expectation, just making sure that their expectations are what we would expect them to do. All right. So Ruthie did a great job of talking about how to not respond to an incident. So once you put yourself, you're in the scene whenever the incident happens, whether that's somebody falling from, not clipping into an auto belay and falling from a climbing gym, or whether that's somebody impacting a braking system incorrectly on a zip line, whatever that is, like put yourself in that scenario and you just got a call on the radio of, hey, this has happened, and you just got to the scene where everything happened. That's what we're going to talk about. That's what we're going to talk about now is when you're in the heat of the incident, how do you respond? What do you say? What can you say? What can you not say? All of those types of things. So the first thing that I want to point out, and this references back to the beginning of the webinar, I said one of the first points is people don't sue because of what happens. people sue typically because they were how they were treated after the fact of what happened. So many times, we hear and we see in lawsuits of, the reason that people are suing is just because people didn't act like they cared after the incident happened. And they just said things such as, they kind of put on their legal face, or, things that they've seen in Law and Order where it's like, ooh, when something happens, we can't comment on anything. So they're just kind of stale, not empathetic. But we 100% encourage you guys, kind of looking at that third point there, is be human. Treat people how, if something embarrassing or very catastrophic happened to you, how you would want to be treated. You would want people to say like, oh my gosh, how are you okay? How are you feeling? What can I get you? Be empathetic in that sense. The other kind of myth that I would point out is a lot of people think that in the moment you can't say I'm sorry. They think that if you say I'm sorry, that you are admitting to the fact that you caused what happened to them. In our opinions, that is, completely inaccurate. And the way I relate to this is, and this is an unfortunate thing to think about, but think about the last time that you were at a funeral or receiving. You go through the receiving line and you say, hey, like, I am so sorry about the loss of this particular person. But just because you're saying I'm sorry does not mean that you said I am responsible for the death of this person. All you're doing is being empathetic. But just be careful about how you say I'm sorry. You can't say, you should not say I'm sorry, that's the sixth time that this has happened this month and we really need to fix that. No, everything needs to be focused around the customer experience. Like, I'm sorry that your experience was ruined, and you're sorry that an injury happened which ruined their experience at your facility. So think of that and keep that in mind. A lot of people also talk about vouchers, refunds, things of that nature. I highly encourage that. Whenever it comes to responding to an incident, I saw a quote one time, then it says, you can either save your money or you can save the reputation of your company. And I would just think about that. Whenever you're responding to these people, if somebody didn't get to experience what they were there to experience, do you really want to keep on to their money? Or would you love to refund their money or have them back out there so that they can experience what they truly came to experience and potentially be a raving fan of your operation? So vouchers or refunds are not admittance of negligence, even though, some people may incorrectly kind of state that. In the heat of the scenario, a lot of people are embarrassed. Think of if they're at your facility on a bachelor trip or bachelorette trip, or they're there with a group of friends or family and they're injured, and everybody has to stop the tour they're on or what they're doing, the experience they're having, and stop. A lot of times people are just embarrassed. And what happens when people are embarrassed is they say things that they really don't mean, or they say things in spite. And you may hear things such as, you're going to hear from my attorney, or you have insurance for this, right? And what I would encourage you and your staff to do is don't answer that question directly. Just play dumb. You have insurance for this, right? That's a great question. Like, I'm not quite sure how our insurance program works, but let me get with the ownership group and we'll circle back with you tomorrow. Is that okay? And what that allows to happen is several things. Number one, it allows them time to calm down and to cool down. And what you'll hear a lot of times when you reach out to the person the next day following up is, oh my gosh, I'm sorry for how I acted. I was just hot and embarrassed, and like, I'm sorry for the things that I said. It allows them time to cool down before you respond to this scenario. And then also, secondly, it allows you time to roundtable how you want to respond to the incident with your management team, ownership team, and potentially even your attorney or insurance advisor, and take into consideration how you want to respond to that person. For example, if you have an accident medical policy, which is a small kind of medical payments policy that you can offer to take care of small medical bills that does not require you be at fault for the injury, you may talk to your insurance advisor and say, yeah, this is a good time. We should probably offer that to try to head things off. So being able to offer that then. So that's kind of in the heat of the moment, incident response, how to respond to an incident. And I know one of the previous questions, and I saved the second bullet point for last because it was one of the questions that was asked earlier, is medical attention. how much do you give? When do you give it? And kind of the fine line between giving medical attention versus, oh my gosh, I've got to get this incident report filled out. Hey, I know the EMS is treating your leg, but can you sign this incident report real quick? And so to talk about that, medical attention should be the number one priority no matter what. Being empathetic, being human, and attending to their medical attention, that should be the number one priority. The incident report can come later. That can come after they're taken away by ambulance, or after they've left the facility. There's, in my opinion, and our opinion at Granite, is their signature on that incident report. Yes, sometimes it causes more confusion than not. Like, yes, it's good to have their incident or their signature on there, but they may not agree with what you've written on that incident report. And typically, we don't advise completing incident reports at the time that things are happening. We advise completing them after the fact, after the participant's gone, so that you can be factual about what happened and really think about the words that you're putting on that piece of paper. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But as far as how much medical attention, always our recommendation is if you've got Band-Aids, you can give them Band-Aid. Don't put the Band-Aid on them. If you've got gauze or anything else, like, you can give them those pieces of equipment, but we would highly recommend you not touching them or helping them or putting those things on. A friend, a family member, somebody can help them do that, that they came with, just because we're not doctors, we're not physicians or anything of that nature, and we don't want to play in that role.
Can I add something here real quick,
Yeah.
Cameron? We also have outfitters that are out in the wilderness, right? You guys have people that are trained, have their woofer and have all kinds of other certifications. Especially if you're in a wilderness environment, if you need to provide medical attention to an injured participant, then you need to provide that medical attention, right? But if you are like in a city, you're accessible by the ambulance, all of that kind of stuff. Don't just provide that medical attention and not worry about calling the ambulance because you've got CPR under control, right? So provide medical attention that you need to provide to keep the situation stable in that moment. But when you can, and if you can kind of offset that and have others come in and facilitate that medical care, then do so. There's not really going to be a great black and white answer to this kind of question. There is a little bit of a gray area to it, but do what you can in the moment, what you need to in the moment. But as soon as you're able to have other people come in and take over the situation, that's what you want to have happen.
Great point there, Ruthie. And as you were talking about that, another question came in, and it's around, how about having your EMT staff treat guests? If you have on staff EMTs, and I think this would be in two categories. Typically, either number one, people have off duty EMTs that are kind of working the facility, or people literally hire and have EMT on the clock for the county or for the jurisdiction they're in on staff. If they're on the clock of the county and they're just there helping out 100%, like they're on their payroll, they're on their insurance, all that, have them help out 100%. If they're just off the duty EMTs that are there to help out, yes, you have a highly trained and qualified person on staff, but just keep in mind that you are still accepting the liability of that. And I would also make sure if they're on your insurance, make sure you have the appropriate insurance to take care of medical services being rendered to someone by that EMT. So if they're providing medical services, you need to make sure that your insurance program takes care of that. Another point that was made up here is, and this is from a climbing gym, crutches, we hand them out and they keep them. Wheelchair, we let them use it, but do not push. Thoughts on that kind of requirement? I think that's a fantastic, if you've got crutches there, again, giving them to them, allowing them to use that, 100% fine. Wheelchair, having it around in case it's needed, 100% fine, but you not pushing the wheelchair, yes. I agree with everything you stated there, and I think that's a perfect approach to everything. Great. And Ruthie, anything else that you thought of on incident response that you didn't mention just a second ago?
No, I think that covers it.
Great. These questions are pouring in. I love it. If we provide medical assistance prior to emergency services, are we personally liable? So 100%. Anything you do, anything your employees, which are agents of the company, anything that they do, you are responsible for. We've seen lawsuits come in when heart attacks happens at facilities that allege that you did not respond quick enough in time, or that your staff was not properly trained, or they improperly administered CPR. We've seen legal suits around all of that. So anything that you do, even if it's, you think it's the Good Samaritan law and you're just doing it because you're there to help, unfortunately in America, even when we do good things, like, we can still be punished for those good things that we try to do. Non-life threatening bleeding, do we stop? That was another question that came in. What I would recommend there is non-life threatening, no. Like, obviously, if blood is gushing everywhere, like Ruthie mentioned a minute ago, you do whatever you can to help that person when it's of that severity. But if it's someone that, they're just kind of bleeding out of their arm and it's non-life threatening, no, give them a Band-Aid, give them the bandages for them to be able to administer those things themselves, or to ask a friend to help them. All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about, guys, that we've talked about in the moment, in the heat, trying to think if there's anything else, incident response. Oh, one other thing that I would point out is, don't try. A lot of people think whenever an incident happens, you've got to get everybody away from the injured participant. And yes, that is true, except for family. Like, if there's family around, like, do not try to separate mom from her injured child. That's not going to go over well, and you may come away with your own injuries. But do not try to do that. Let family stay around, and it's for the benefit of you, because if you remove family from the injured child or person they came with, they're going to assume the worst. They're going to assume they're not going to know how you're responding, how well you're taking care of the person. They're not going to know what you're saying, so they're going to make up kind of what they assume you're saying, and the story is going to be very tainted if they're not there to hear it and see it by themselves. So I would let family members stay around the incident response area. All right, next we're going to talk about incident reports and witness statements. This is a huge part of the process, and it's very important. If you click on the QR code, it'll go to our website, which has sample incident reports and sample witness statements. But the reason that these two things are so important is because, keep in mind, 3 years down the road, you're going to have to recreate 100% of what happened here and the environment of what happened. Think about, something you did 2 weeks ago and trying to recreate that. Like, hey, what did you have for dinner on March 18th? Like, I have no clue. Imagine 3 years down the road trying to recreate the scenario. And so that's why these incident reports and witness statements are so important. We already talked about, when is it needed. You need to establish that common guideline within your operations. And Ruthie did a great job of explaining that earlier on in the process. Who completes them? This is huge as well. In my opinion, hourly staff, or kind of what I would call just your daily employees or team members, should not be completing should not be completing incident reports. It should be a management level team member or above. Now, can you listen to the staff member that saw exactly what happened and essentially write down what they said on paper and then turn it over to them and say, hey, is this accurate? Yes, 100%. But the reason that we don't like hourly or kind of daily team members completing the incident reports is just because they've not been through a webinar like this. They don't understand sometimes that what they put on that paper is going to be in front of a judge and jury potentially in 3 years, and it's going to be seen as the law, like what exactly happens. And sometimes what we see that they put on incident reports may be like, I can't believe Ruthie did this again. Like, I've told her 4 times that she shouldn't do this, but she doesn't listen. And she just keeps doing it over and over again. Sometimes that happens. Or sometimes they may put in on the incident report, yeah, like, I've told management that, this auto belay, like this is not the best place for it in the climbing gym. If they just move it over to the other wall, it would be a lot better. Like that, those are the types of things that we do not want on incident reports. So having management level or higher complete them is very important. The next thing is facts. That is the only thing that belongs on the incident report. This is if you've got a statement on your incident report that says, what could we have done to prevent this from happening? Remove that statement. That's not the place in the incident report. This is not the incident report's not the place to kind of diagnose what we could do better. It's just to document the facts. It's also not the place for medical opinions of what could have happened. For example, and I'm going to, sorry, Ruthie, but I'm going to injure you here. But let's say Ruthie grabs her chest and falls to the ground and passes away. I didn't even just injure you, Ruthie. I killed you. But let's say that happens and you put on the incident report, Ruthie had a heart attack. Like, we don't know that. I would not put that. That's a medical diagnosis. Leave that to the medical professionals. What you should put is what exactly happened. Ruthie grabbed the upper left portion of her chest, fell to the ground, and medical attention quickly surrounded her within 30 seconds and began performing CPR. We performed CPR for 45 minutes until EMS got to the facility, and then they took over. That's how that should be described rather than, giving medical diagnoses. If you do not have on your incident report, was medical attention offered and did they accept or decline it, I would highly encourage you to add that to your incident report. We see that alleged in so many incidents, and typically this is how it plays out. Somebody is injured at your facility. They're with a group or family. They're embarrassed. They don't want to admit it. So they keep going through the facility. Then afterwards, they go to the urgent care. They realize it's a lot more significant of an injury than they thought. And they allege, and keep in mind, in responding to this, you said, hey, do you need help? Do you need medical attention? And they said no. But in responding to this, and when they do the legal suit, typically they say they didn't care about me, they made me finish the tour, and they didn't even offer medical attention. 3 years later, there's no way to document that you did offer medical attention unless you have that question on your incident report. The last thing I'll say on incident reports before I kind of look at the Q&A and see what we have there, or Ruthie's probably already teed that up, but is the last statement is, who is a witness? You should be strategic about who is completing a witness statement for you. What I would stay away from is typically people who came with that injured participant. It's not that we don't care about their opinion, or it's not that we don't care about what they thought happened, but typically their views are very tainted and skewed views of what actually happened because they're so emotional or caught up in the incident happening to their family member or friend. For example, child is injured. We should not ask for a witness statement from mom. That's probably going to be a very skewed version of exactly the factual things of what happened. We want witness statements from unbiased third parties. And if we cannot find those, or if let's say it's a zipline tour with 8 people and it's a group of 8 family members, like, yes, you can try to get the incident report from the most unbiased one. But also employees can fill in for witness statements as well if they saw exactly what happened there, that realized that. Ruthie, what would you add to incident reports and witness statements?
I think another great question, in addition to, did they refuse medical care? Another great question to add to it is, did they continue the activity? Did they think that it was just a minor injury at first and they just were embarrassed and they wanted the activity to continue, and they just said, no, I'm good, I'll push through it, and I just want to continue, the adventure with you guys. And then they leave later on and they find out it was a more severe injury and it escalated and they needed professional medical care. That's another great question to make sure that you're documenting on this accident report as well. Mm-hmm. And then in the Q&A, so someone asked, how do we be empathetic and human, but also refuse to assist in non-life threatening accidents? we're absolutely not refusing to assist. We want to be right there with them, saying, "Hey, we're here. We've got a couple of things in the back we can bring you if you want some like ice or you want a Band-Aid. Do you want us to call, the EMT to come and help?" We're absolutely not refusing to assist. We are absolutely, being human and offering the help that we can, but we're also encouraging them, listen, if you need professional medical attention, then please allow us to call for you. And, we're here to support you until they arrive. And then another question, it's a great question, is, do we then have just first aid stations public access where you can just kind of point people over in that direction, provide them a chair, and just kind of allow them to sit there and kind of go through it and pick out what they want? It's a great question. I think that that's a good idea to maintain kind of back office, though, in your own scenario. I think that opening it up to the public, depending on the extent of that kind of first aid box and what all you have in it, it could potentially get you into trouble with, especially if you think about someone under 18 coming in there and just like pulling stuff out of it, not knowing what they're getting into. And it also kind of strips away, I feel like, your ability to know what was taken out of there and what was used. I think you guys maintaining control of that in your back office, and asking people what they need. Again, if it's serious enough where they really need like serious first aid, then you're offering to call for that serious first aid. You're not just offering up things outside of like something to stop the bleeding or band-aids or some ice on a regular basis. I think maintaining that back office, though, is a good idea. And then regarding the document from the QR code, can you give examples of how you would fill out the follow-up action notes section? That is a great idea, and it's coming up here in just a moment. So let's hold on to that.
That's perfect. And I guess I will actually go ahead and transition into that, Ruthie, talking about post-accident. And that's really what the follow-up action notes, that's what this is talking about, is the post-accident plan. The next day, what do you do?
Yeah, so a lot of times someone is injured and they leave your facility and you fill out the accident report, and that might be the end of the road for a lot of your accident response. But I think that this part of your accident response is super crucial, and it's not something to be missed out on. So besides your own internal debriefing with your team members of what they should or should not do or say, how they should communicate with each other, what happened, how you as an operation might approach things differently in the future. That's all an internal debriefing. And like we've talked about already, that should be verbal as much as possible. Consider even bringing in, for a really serious accident, your attorney to be a part of that conversation as well. But a question we get a lot is, can you communicate with the injured participant? And I highly recommend this. I think that it's part of the, being human step, communicating with the injured participant and or their family, and checking up on them. So this is the time, for that follow-up, saying, in the moment when you're dealing with the medical attention, all of that, you're not saying, hey, we'll talk about insurance or we'll get your ticket refunded or anything like that. Like, your focus is on medical care. You're not worried about any of that. That is a conversation for later. But this is the time to follow up with them and saying, hey, we've been thinking about you. We're hoping that you're recovering well, and just, calling or emailing to check up and see how things are going. I'll tell you what, we refunded your ticket. You should see that come through in the next day or so. We're sorry this ruined your experience. We'd love you to come back and have another adventure with us in the future, when you're healed up and ready for it, right? This is the time to communicate all of that kind of stuff. And then, again, like Cameron mentioned earlier, in the heat of the moment, if somebody is asking you about insurance, anything like that, you're playing dumb. Even if you know exactly how all that works, you've gone through the process. In that moment, you're focused on medical care. You say, I don't know how that all works. Let's focus on getting you, the care that you need in this moment, and we'll have that conversation later. This is the time, if you have them, again, kind of asking you, I'm going to have all these medical bills. I don't know how I'm going to pay for them. What can you guys do for me? I feel like you're at fault. If you're kind of hearing those buzzwords coming in from them, then this is the time to consider using a participant accident policy that you might have as a part of your program. So this is something, talk with your insurance representation about whether or not you have it if you are unsure or if you want to add it to your program. But this is the no fault coverage that Cameron was mentioning. So you don't have to have fault in the accident. It's a goodwill coverage that you can say, hey, you know what? I'm so sorry this happened. Let us cover your medical bills for you. So if you do have that kind of heated conversation with them, they're asking what you can do for them. You can offer them this, and many times it'll appease them, depending on the accident, of course. But if you can appease them, get them feeling good about it, feeling like they're taken care of, then they might not ever seek out an attorney and bring a larger lawsuit against you. So this can protect and insulate your general liability program from having a bigger claim. You might just pay out 5, 10,000 in medical bills versus, 100,000 or more, lawsuit against your general liability policy that kind of draws things out and has a bunch of other expenses coming with it. The follow-up, don't wait weeks or a month down the road. Make that pretty quick, 24 hours later to within 3 days. And then document that. So the question that was in Q&A, what does that documentation look like? This is what that looks like. What was communicated? How did they respond to it? Were they having those kinds of responses like, hey, this wasn't your fault. This was all me. I made a silly mistake and I'm excited to come back with you guys in the future. This is where you're documenting all of that kind of stuff. When does insurance get involved? So there's kind of a trigger moment when you are served with a lawsuit. So let's say you have an accident, you've reported it to your insurance carrier, and it's something you're preparing to potentially defend you for in the future, but it's not actually a lawsuit yet. All of that conversation, your insurance representation might have some guiding, some guidance to kind of give you through that process, but most of your guidance is going to come from your own attorney that you have. But once you have a lawsuit served to you, that is when insurance takes over. So your insurance carrier will assign you an attorney at that point to facilitate all communication. And at that point, you are not communicating directly with the injured participant or their family anymore. All of that should be guided by the attorney. And Cameron already touched on media. I know we're running out of time here. From the media perspective, though, one person is facilitating any conversation and all conversation with media. An important consideration here is maybe don't have the owner be this person communicating with the media. Just like we were talking about kind of the idea of being able to play dumb with how your insurance policy works, any of that. If you have someone that is not the owner having those media conversations, they have a buffer, right? They can say, if you get a difficult question, you can say, I'm really not sure. That's not something we're prepared to answer at this time. I'll have to consult with our owner. That just kind of gives you that buffer for those kind of difficult conversations. Cameron, anything to add to that?
Great job, Ruthie. And I know, so we'll be about 3 more minutes, guys, as we're closing in on time here. We got one more slide to go over. To add to one thing there, talk about follow-up within 3 days. And one person mentioned this in the Q&A, which is great, and I completely agree, is listen to what they're saying and document that. If they talk about, yeah, we went out the night before and we're drinking and I'm just not fully recovered yet, or yes, I have a pre-existing knee injury and I injured my knee again, document all of those things. Those are very important things that'll be important in the litigation and coming back up. We recommend phone. I know the question was phone or email. We recommend phone calls in the follow-ups, not an email. It's just more personable there. All right, so the last slide that we're going to talk about is really just best practices. And these are just a couple of best practices that you should implement. If it's a significant incident, retire the equipment or set it aside. Tag it. Do not use incident July 12th, 2023. Just in case that piece of equipment is vital in the investigation, just make sure to retire it and not put it back into use. Make sure you're taking photos of equipment and surroundings whenever the incident happens. I know a lot of people have implemented a platform called Jolt or some other type of platform as incident reporting. and it requires at the bottom photos whenever you're reporting that incident. So you're taking pictures of the equipment, the surroundings. And what that allows you to do is to be able to state actually the conditions of the surroundings 3 years later whenever you're defending this thing in court. If they allege the platform was completely covered in moss, like, no, it wasn't, but you can't prove that if you don't have photos of exactly the surroundings. So make sure you do that. And then make sure that you're just keeping all this in electronic storage where every incident you have the name and date of the incident and the folder. And then in that folder, you have photos of equipment, incident report, witness statements, waivers, all the things that you may need if 3 years later you need all of those things. And then the last thing I'll say on best practice is if you have surveillance, make sure you're pulling that and make sure you have a process to pull that surveillance. If you wait until you get served with a lawsuit, your video footage is going to rewrite over itself and you're not going to have access to that video surveillance. So it may be a process of anytime we complete an incident report of X severity and that's reviewed by management, IT is pulling that, or the owner is pulling that video footage and putting in that electronic file as well. So we're 2 minutes over, guys. What a great webinar, and thanks for all the awesome questions and interactions. For any additional questions, Ruthie and I are more than happy to answer any. We love answering questions and engaging with people in the industry. We'd be happy to help. Feel free to reach out to us by email. This will be recorded. It is being recorded. It'll be pushed out to your email address probably within the next week, and then it will also be put on our website. But thank you guys for your time. And we'll see you guys on our next webinar on June 5th. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, y'all.